help move it around, make sure they get it. The speaker, the microphone.
Good morning. No, I think it's good afternoon, isn't it? And that's getting away in a hurry. We will welcome everyone to meeting of Game Fish and Parks. We have two bills on our agenda today. And I'll remind everyone, for you folks that are going to have on the committee and for those that will offer some testimony on these bills, to make sure you turn your mics off when you finish speaking, because we have a little problem with some feedback here. Those of you that want to speak, if you'll sign up, we're going to allocate time out to on House Bill 277 to both sides of the question. So if you'll sign up, and we'll take care. I think we have adequate time for everyone to speak. I think we're about ready to go. We're going to ask the Reverend Representative Al Williams to offer a word of prayer for us as we get started. Representative Williams.
I am aspiring. I just haven't been called, or at least I haven't heard it yet, but let us pray. Almighty and everlasting, thou art eternal God, we thank you for the opportunity. We thank you, Lord, for this day. We thank you for those that have come to do your business. Lord, we ask that whatever we do, we keep you in mind, and we do it for the betterment of this state and our fellow man. For it is in the mighty and majestic name of Jesus we pray. Amen.
Thank you for those words, Representative Williams. We appreciate that. The first issue of business we'll take up today will be House Bill 485 by Representative McCall. Chairman McCall, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 485 attempts to deal with a feral hog problem that is running rampant in the whole state of Georgia. It's one of the biggest, it is the biggest problem, I think, that agriculture has as far as production agriculture goes. DNR recognizes it as a problem. They're kind of at a loss as to what to do. Farmers recognize it as a huge problem, and we do what we can. But staying up all night shooting them because they've gone nocturnal is not really what we want to do. But what this bill addresses, when I was younger, which was a couple of years ago, you had to go where I live and hunt and hunt and hunt to try to find a hog down on the swamps, in the rivers, and you barely could even see where they've been, let alone run up on one. Nowadays, all you got to do is pretty much ride down the road, and you can see cropland tow up, right-of-ways where they cross the highways, rooted up. And I think one of the reasons because of that is people that may have not had them back then wanted them so they could run them with dogs or hunt them or whatever, and they were catching them and transporting them from one place, from where they caught them, to a place that didn't have them and turning them loose. And a hog's gestation period is 3 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days, roughly 4 months. You got another litter on the ground. Hogs have 8 or 10 to the litter. I never thought I'd rather have a deer than something else to mess with my crops, but I'd a whole lot rather have a deer that the most they can have a year is 2 instead of 30 that a sow can have. So all this bill does is address the the transporting and releasing of feral hogs, and basically all it says is new language into the Title 27 that says that nobody shall release any trapped or transported feral hog that is not into a fenced area where they can't get out. The punishment will be a misdemeanor of a high and aggravated nature, $1,500 fine, and anybody with a hunting license or a trapping license that is convicted of this will lose it for 3 years. And this is a small step toward trying to take care of the feral hog problem that we have. And Mr. Chairman, a fellow from Twiggs County who is a farmer and has some pictures of, and this is just I want everybody on the committee to get the picture. Jeffrey, you mind handing them out? It's what they can actually do. So, Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind one guy talking real quick on this bill.
Absolutely. We have Mr. Rocky Nobles, who's a farmer down in Twiggs, I think, Mr. Chairman, and a member of Georgia Farm Bureau, who's got lots of experience with this, and that's where these pictures come from. Mr. We want you to have to go through the same thing that we have to go through.
Well, I'm a farmer and a speaker.
Don't take 10 minutes to clear your throat now.
All right.
Go ahead. Good to have you here. Appreciate you coming and taking your time.
Yes, thank you. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, sir.
I'm a farmer down in Twiggs in Blakely County. The pictures you have here is where I planted a field in 2009. It was a 40-acre field. It was planted twice. That was the second time it was planted. I didn't ever gather a thing off from it. I went back later on and planted it in soybeans down the road. But these hogs is a big problem and all. And people don't realize how much damage they can do. I figured the loss on this field right here, just what it come out of my pocket, was about $13,000. And they just continue to grow. They continue to get worse. They just multiplying. We've hunted them at night. We've had people run them with dogs. It just ain't working. It just ain't working. We just would appreciate any help that we can get with any of this stuff, because there's a pile of us down there that's having a lot of trouble. And like I said, we appreciate any kind of help we can get from y'all, and we thank you. The cost of all this stuff, everybody knows anything about farming, how much it costs this day and time, and you just can't afford to lose these kind of crops. You sure can't. I won't even plant peanuts down here on this farm because of these hogs, because they just won't leave them alone. Everybody knows how bad they're tearing them up. These hogs even stay in the field, and after the corn makes, and you get it up and it makes, they'll follow the pivot around and where the water is, and they'll stay and live inside that field year round, eating corn. And old sow, she'll have 4 or 5 pigs. All she's gonna do is tear the stalks down so the pigs can eat, and she's gonna tear down 10 times more than she's gonna eat.
Mm-hmm.
That's the kind of problem. Once they get in that field and it's done made corn, you can't get them out. They're in there for the duration until you pull it. And then that's when you get sick to see what they have done to your field on the inside. But we sure would appreciate any help we can do, and we thank y'all for letting us come up here and testify.
Thank you, Mr. Nobles. You can. I want to say one thing first. He's talking about cost. He has a good handle on cost, but to give you one example, a bag of that seed corn he plants that field with used to cost about $60 to $80. Now that same bag's about $200 to $300. That's right. So the economics of it are quite dramatic. And yes, sir, Representative Bruce, I'd recognize you.
I'm from Harley, so I'm not a farmer.
Yes, sir.
But are these pigs edible? I know some are, but is this particular one edible?
Well, if you like deer, you probably eat them. They taste about like. But nobody eats them no more.
Nobody eats them.
Nobody eats them.
Okay, because I was just saying that'd be one way to get rid of them if they were edible.
But you eat wild hogs up every day.
But I just got to sit with some of my colleagues, and they were telling me about some of the stuff that y'all do eat. So,
Moving right along, Representative Bruce.
Mr. Chairman, for those of y'all that don't realize what this is, these are corn rows where the hogs took their nose and rooted it up, eating the seed out of the rows.
Yeah, they didn't miss a seed. They got every seed out of the row.
100%.
Yeah.
Other questions for Mr. Nobles or even for the chairman on this issue? Thank you, sir. We appreciate you taking time to come up.
Yes, sir.
And hopefully we can do something to help out on this as an issue all over the state.
Thank you, sir.
If there's no questions, the floor would be open for a motion on House Bill 485.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we do pass House Bill 485.
Thank you, Representative Knight. I do pass motion on House Bill 485. Do I hear a second?
Second.
We have a second. Any further comment or question? If not, we'll ask for the vote. All those in favor, raise your right hand. The other one, that's right, Jason, that hand, that's the right one. Anybody opposed, left. Good. We'll pass this on with a due pass recommendation from this committee on House Bill 485.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Nobles. We appreciate you being here. Hopefully this will help. Okay, now we'll take up House Bill 277, which we've spent considerable time on. We thank Chairman McCall for chairing a subcommittee that has worked with this bill for a couple of meetings. I think we spent about 3 to 4 hours on this bill, hearing from both sides of the equation, and we've had some very good testimony and made some very good points. So, Mr. Chairman, at this time, we would ask you to give us a subcommittee report on House Bill 277.
Thank you, sir. After 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 versions, we passed out House Bill 277 yesterday, I think. Was it yesterday? After meeting probably at least 5 or 6 hours. Lindsay's got more notes than she does off of what goes on the floor. But we passed it out onto the big committee with a due pass recommendation yesterday. And you didn't need me to go over what the bill does, do you?
No, sir. I think we'll take that up in just a minute.
Okay.
I think what we passed out was sub 5871S.
That's correct.
5871S.
That's right.
And I think we have another sub, one of those that you mentioned.
That would be correct.
That you mentioned, which will be 5872S. If it's appropriate this time, and with agreement of the chairman of the subcommittee, would ask Ledge Counsel if he would speak to the changes between 71 and 72. Wayne, are you good to do that?
Yes.
And they are minor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, committee members, we're addressing 5871S is what we passed out of subcommittee, but we'll be addressing the bill we'll be speaking to today will be 5872S. Counsel?
LC 255872S was a new substitute prepared request from the chairman in an attempt to address some concerns that DNR had raised following the subcommittee meeting.
A question from any member of the committee on the language of 5872S.
Mr. Chairman, I've got concerns.
Here we go. Take this.
Mr. Chairman, I passed around an email when I got back from John Bowers, who is the wildlife, I think it's the management director. I don't know if that's his correct title.
Does everyone have a copy?
And the concerns that I've had the whole time, you know, what we're doing here is we're picking one group of hunters over another group, and I'm sure that many of the people in the room probably do more than one type of hunting. If we're really hunters, most of us are passionate about more than one pursuit of one game animal. I know many of us probably pursue 4 or 5 during the hunting season. And what I have concerns about is that we're making an exception for deer hunting in the code here, and I believe that it's making an exception for deer hunting at the exclusion of other hunters who may be pursuing other game such as dove, duck, any of the other game, because under the Georgia code all other baiting of all other animals is illegal to hunt game. If you look at this email, at question number 1, I asked, you know, are there any exceptions for baiting under the current code? And as you can read, you know, it states current code, and the current exception was the 200 yards from line of sight. Then it goes on under the federal code, and I want to remind the committee that the federal code trumps state code. It trumps state code. So when we're in a dove field, or we're in a duck blind, or on the pond or the river or on Lake Seminole, whatever it is, federal code trumps state code. And we're subject to the laws of the feds, and they override Georgia. And herein lies the problem. And if you look under number 2, I asked a question: would you also provide any exceptions to the law regarding property line boundaries? And there are no exception for property line boundaries. And then it says, as such, the presence of bait on or near a property line can affect the legality of hunting activities on the property adjacent to the property, or the property where bait or feed has been placed. Let me read that again. As such, the presence of bait on or near a property line can affect the legality of hunting activities on property adjacent to the property line, or property where bait has been placed. I'll further remind the committee, for those who are not hunters or who don't hunt much, that bait has to be removed, and I think this is under federal code and under Georgia code, has to be removed for 10 days before that area is huntable. So in a situation, go ahead. So in a situation where we've got somebody who is either for feed or for baiting purposes has put bait out on an adjacent property, and again, it could be anywhere from 40 yards to 300 yards depending on what you're doing and the type of property. We're basically, I believe under this bill, we've provided an exception for deer and deer hunters to bait. We have provided that exception in here to the exclusion of somebody else on an adjoining piece of property who is enjoying their pursuit, or who may be on the river, maybe on the Flint River. What if we're on the WMA on Joe Kerr's hunting? What if I'm on the dove field, my annual dove shoot that I have, and somebody's got a feeder 300 yards away baiting their deer, shooting their deer? And I think what this does is, I think this provides an exception that puts the deer hunters, in order to make this legal, to put this in a situation where they get to feed and they get to bait over my right as a dove hunter, a duck hunter, or any other game pursuant to Georgia law, because there is no exception that I can hunt. And that's the reason we don't have baiting in Georgia. That's why it's currently illegal to have baiting in Georgia, is because all of the hunters out there should have an equal playing field, okay, to pursue whatever game they have, and pursue it in a legal manner without baiting. And I think this also gets into a property rights issue. You know, if you're baiting deer on the other side, I believe that this accepts out deer, making it legal to bait deer. The way I read this, legal to bait deer, okay? We've just made it legal, to the exception of the other people pursuing their interest or their game that they want to pursue. And I've got strong hesitations about the bill in general for other reasons, but I think what we're doing here is we're putting other people in jeopardy. And I don't think the hunters that brought this really want to put other people in jeopardy. Because guess what, guys? The minute you find it, even if I'm across the line, okay, on my property, totally legal, you've taken away my right to hunt for 10 days after that bait is removed. Is that not Georgia code? So that's the problem I have with this, or with part of this bill, along with other parts, and I believe this puts other hunters at risk.
Chairman McCall, you had a point. Thank you, David.
We all know that Representative Knight is far more versed on hunting than I am. I hadn't had a hunting license in 20 years. What hunting we do on our place. And not saying we hadn't killed our share of deer in those 20 years. It might have had a little permit to do it with. But the federal laws that he was talking about, he mentioned dove and duck. Both of them are federally protected birds, so federal laws probably do trump state laws on that. Both 71 and 72 substitute doesn't allow it on WMA or federal land. And where my disagreement with what David just said is, as far as him sitting on his side of the line and the bait being on the other side, I think somewhere somebody has to prove criminal intent that the hunter knowingly and willingly was sitting over the bait while he was hunting. So after having said all that, I'd like to move on 5872S so we can get that discussion started and let Jason explain it.
I'll second it. Have a motion and a second that we move the question and that we are. We've had a motion and a second that we move the question to, after this brief discussion, to the sub that's been prepared. 5872S is what will be before us now. At this point in time, I think it's proper procedure, Mr. Counsel, if we take testimony at this point in time, or do we need to vote on?
That's at the discretion of the chair. If you vote now, you're voting on the substitute.
Exactly. So we won't vote now then. I think that's what we discussed earlier.
We had to get 72 up.
Right. So now, but that's what we'll ask the author to comment on. Will be 5872S. But first, we've had lengthy discussions, and thank you, Representative Knight and Chairman Knight and Chairman McCall for your comments on those perspectives. I'm going to ask real quick, Legislative Council, if you will speak to those issues before we start into the committee discussion and the public discussion one more time into those issues, if you don't mind.
As to the differences?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Thank you. Again, 5871S is what was reported out of subcommittee. 5872S was prepared at the request of the chairman to try to address some concerns that Department of Natural Resources had about the provisions for prohibiting putting out bait. So those were restored on lines 17 through 20 in 5872, with the exception on line 19 for deer. So it does restore the current prohibition against baiting game animals and game birds in areas where people will be hunting, but it does provide an exception for deer on line 19. That's the only difference between the two substitutes.
Thank you, Mr. Counsel.
Thank you.
All right, at this point in time, we're going to get into some discussion, and we'll ask the author if he will give us his comments on this bill at this time. Representative Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, we've spent a lot of time talking about and discussing this issue, and I'm going to probably be repeating myself for some of you, and I'm going to be pretty brief. I think, it's no secret that this bill has come up in the past, so most of us know exactly what we're dealing with this issue. To me, this is a simply an issue where we're allowing the actual folks that are affected by it have some say-so. And going through the bill, the last substitute, the 72S, I think council's done a good job of explaining, but basically what all this bill does is, and it is currently legal to supplemental feed or bait deer in the state of Georgia. The only thing that this bill does is in the southern zone, the hunting zones are divided in a northern and a southern zone. And this bill in the southern zone only will strike that 200 yards and out of sight provision and allow you to hunt over supplemental feed or bait without any restrictions as to location. So basically it's just allowing, right now you can be hunting within proximity of being able to harvest an animal, but you just can't see it, and it has to be over 200 yards. Now, anybody that hunts or is a hunter, and this has been the case for years. This isn't new technology, but you can with pretty good accuracy. I mean, a decent shooter can harvest a deer 300 yards away 8 out of 10 times. I mean, that's no secret. So the 200 yards and out of sight really doesn't keep you from hunting, within the ability to harvest an animal in the proximity to the feed. Supplemental feeding is a management tool, folks. It is a management tool, especially in the southern zone where you don't have near the hardwoods and you don't have the natural acorns and crops during the wintertime to sustain a healthy deer herd. So supplemental feeding is a very good, useful tool, and that's why many of the other states around us, such as Florida, South Carolina, and Texas is the one that most of us think of, because that's where more so than any other state, that's where people like to go deer hunting. But that's all this does, and we've had several different substitutes, and we've tried to address all the concerns with this bill. When we started out, we were allowing it in the to strike the 200 yards in the northern zone also. So it was very obvious on this issue that the folks that are opposed to this are overwhelmingly located in the northern part of the state, and the hunters and the sportsmen in the southern part of the state are overwhelmingly in favor of this as a management tool. So we addressed that issue and did what I call the people want, and took the northern zone out, so it only applies to the southern zone. There was some issues like we talked about with the language, so we simply, all you had to do to correct that was add "other than deer" on line 19, which took care of that. Now, one other thing that we have done to this bill that really is a good piece to it is right now you can supplemental feed, deer or hogs or anything. I mean, when you're supplemental feeding and you're putting feed in the woods, you're feeding all the animals. But currently, you're going to hear some talk today about chronic waste disease, TB and all. We've been supplemental feeding the deer herd in this state for as long as I can remember, 25, 30 years, probably longer than that. There's not one single documented case of any one of those diseases in this state. The closest documented case is, I think, in Virginia, and deer do not migrate or move that far, so that's not even an issue, and that's certainly not an issue with this bill, because the supplemental feed is already out there. It's being used as a management tool, and it works well, and we don't have any problems. But what we've done is, if there were any kind of documented case of any communicable disease, this bill allows the DNR or the commissioner to actually step in and stop it immediately. That's something that they don't have the ability to do now. So that really is a good piece to this bill. I think the best part of this bill is and the right thing to do was what we did in making it southern zone only. It is just overwhelmingly the majority of the hunters are completely in favor, and I'll be glad to go through numbers and so forth, but I'm going to keep moving on and address some other issues. You know, when you start talking about game birds and game animals, and then you start talking about deer and feral hogs, I think it's fair to say that deer and especially deer are the only game animals in the state that we're having problems with vehicle collisions, and it becomes a public safety issue. And during the first subcommittee meeting, I brought in some information from the Georgia Insurance Information Service that just, you know, that had the facts on the number of deer collision claims in the last year in the state of Georgia. That number, I've got it here somewhere, but it was right at 44,000, 43,000 some odd deer collision claims just in the last year in the state of Georgia. That cost the insurance companies, and I know, you know, a lot of people don't have any sympathy for the insurance companies, but I mean, that's costing about $150 million a year in the state of Georgia. And but you know, it's a public safety issue. I mean, we have got more deer in Georgia now. I mean, 20 years ago, you hardly had any problems with your number of deer. So when you start comparing deer to other game birds and game animals, it's a complete different ball game we're dealing with. The feral hogs are just a complete nuisance, as we've seen on the demonstration earlier, and this bill will allow hunting over the feral hogs also. You know, we've gone through testimony after testimony talking about deer management and deer herds, but this is a very useful tool for deer management, and it's been being used for a long time. You know, DNR held a bunch of hearings around the state on this issue a few years ago, and as part of their overall deer management plan for the state, which runs through 2014, that plan, even that study pointed out that it was just complete. It was overwhelming that the meetings held in the southern part of the state, the hunters were in favor of this, and in the northern part is where you start running into your opposition. So we've addressed that. We've done everything we can to correct that problem, and in my opinion, it's not a problem. And we're doing what the people want, what the hunters want. And I will point out that, you know, it's easy to think that, you know, this bill is going to allow people to kill a lot more deer or harvest more deer. Folks, you can kill 10 does and 2 bucks a year, each hunter in the state of Georgia, as far as the number of tags you're issued. I don't know anybody that's killed that harvests that many deer. I mean, that's a lot of deer. So by using this management tool of hunting over the supplemental feed, I mean, folks are going to be able to maybe see more deer, which is going to help us to lure more kids to the sport. I'll give you an example. I remember when I was a little boy, you know, we went out and built some deer stands, and you know, I was about 12 years old, just getting old enough to sit in the stand by myself, and you know, I just went hunting several times, didn't see any deer. Of course, we didn't have as many deer then as we do now. But then I was invited to go down to North Florida, just outside of Tallahassee, which is close to where we live. And it was the most exciting hunt that I'd ever been on. And I was hooked from that point to deer hunting, because I sat in a stand in Florida back then, and that was a long time ago, and it was legal to hunt over the bait. And I saw 27 deer that day. That's more deer than I'd ever seen in my entire life, and I was not far from home. And from that point on, I was able to start learning how to pattern deer and watch their behavior patterns and enjoy being out there and watching. And when I call this a management tool, the way it is a management tool is because when you're able to see your deer herd and watch them, you're able to choose which deer need to be harvested and which deer need to be left in the woods. You know, you want to leave your younger does in the woods because they're still reproducing and so forth, and then you might have a buck that has some kind of problem with it. You know, it could have, you know, any kind of a problem, and you are able to locate that, and basically that's called a cull, and you can get those out of your herd easier. And so that's a good management tool to make the overall health of your deer herd, you know, a much better situation. You know, this
land and somebody is feeding their deer during deer season. What is going to prevent me from getting a ticket?
When you mentioned that's the federal law, the federal law says that you actually have to, where, by the aid of baiting or on or over a baited area, where a person knows or reasonably should know that the area is or has been baited. So as long as you're not in knowledge of that and you didn't actually do it yourself, we're still got the provision in here to protect the hunter. And I talked to a lot of game wardens. I got a lot of game warden friends, and again, in my part of the state, these folks are tired of walking through the woods trying to write tickets to basically most of the hunters out there. And I don't know of a single game warden that would actually try to make an issue out of that, and somebody coming down to an area they're not familiar with and not knowing what's going on there and trying to, I mean, this is all about private property, because I forgot to mention earlier that another thing we did in this bill is say that you can't hunt over the bait unless you have the landowner's permission. So we've tried to address this as a personal, property rights issue. I mean, this gives people, a landowner, the right to say, yes, I own the land. I'm paying a ton of taxes on it. I want to hunt how I want to in South Georgia. And as far as, somebody else hunting on a neighboring piece of property, first of all, if you try to go over there and check to see if there's feed, that's trespassing. It's against the law to go on somebody else's property without permission. So if you can't go over there without permission, if you say that you went over there and walked over there and found some corn and it's, close to where you're going to be dove hunting, first of all, you broke the law because you trespassed. So, yes, sir.
I'm going to remind both of you, if we're going to hear some more testimony from some folks both of you want to hear from, we're going to have to make your point and keep it short.
But again, the point where I didn't know, that may be a valid point, but this is a real life example. I do a dove hunt every year, okay, and there are fields, and so next door on somebody's private property, I put in all the time and all the work to prepare a dove field legally, and I'm talking about prepare a good dove field, and it's very legal. And here comes season, and here comes 10 days, okay, or 9 days before the beginning of the of dove season, and you go out 40 yards on the other side of your property and you put up a feeder, and you've seen the pictures, okay, plain visible sight. At this point, not only do I have reasonable knowledge, or knowledge that I reasonably should have known that it was baited, I now have actual first-hand knowledge that that is baited. And what you have just done, you have just basically flushed my dove season down the road and my personal property rights down the road of my ability to enjoy a dove hunt, because you chose to put a feeder out and start feeding deer.
Okay.
And in that situation, there is reasonable knowledge, or reasonable cause. There's actually explicit knowledge that I knew that that was baited.
Can I answer that?
Go ahead, Reverend Shaw.
Just real quick.
Thank you.
This bill does not change that none so whatsoever, because it's, as I mentioned, it is already legal to supplemental feed. So you can already have a feeder. This has been going on for a long time, and that case you just brought up has never happened. A game warden, these game wardens are fair people. They're not going to go to your dove shoot and say, we're going to start writing you a ticket because somebody on a neighboring property has a feeder. That's just not going to happen, Representative Knight.
I think part of it goes to intent, and intent to perhaps enhance that specific game species, which would be dove versus deer. Let's move on to another question. Representative Williams.
Very, very quickly, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Having been born and raised in a hunting area and have seen it, and I certainly can appreciate the discussion. But I'll be very frank with you, a game warden that writes tickets under circumstances as questionable as that does not need to be working for the state of Georgia. And I think very, even the feds, because we tend to forget that the feds work for us too. I mean, we point everything else out that the feds do. Now I'm gonna give you a chance, Mr. Representative. Now I want you to be as polite to me as I am to you when you're making your point. And my point is that the federal game wardens work for us too. I don't know about your feds, But I think my feds can certainly be written up. That's not realistic. I just don't think we have that many dumb federal agents out there. I don't.
Thank you, Representative Williams. Other questions for the author of the bill? Okay. We'll move right along. Thanks to all the committee. I tell you, we had plenty of passion on this bill. No doubt about that. Okay. We're going to have a little bit of time more since our council can be here with us, and we have the room a little bit longer because of our delayed start. Now, we're going to let some folks speak. Now, we had a list out for those in favor of and those opposed. Now, at this point in time, I have Mr. Dickey is the only speaker we have in favor of, and Mr. Murphy, Mr. Keel, and Mr. Tanner opposed. Is that still? Does anyone else want to speak? We're going to do a little divvying up on time here so we can continue this issue to move forward. All right, Mr. Murphy, Mr. Keel, and Mr. Tanner, we're going to give you 15 minutes between the three of you. So if one of you needs a little more time than the other, I'm going to allow you to manage that time yourself. So we'll ask you to come up and we'll, Representative Shaw, would you pass that microphone down, please, and identify yourself for the committee and for our audience on the internet, and we'll let you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. I appreciate your time here. It's also considered unethical to do so for turkeys. We make exceptions around the country for things like wild hogs, which we've talked about and we agree are a nuisance species. But why should we reduce North America's premier game animal, an animal that drives 53% of the entire hunting economy in this country, a species that over 85% of hunters in North America hunts? If we don't get deer management, deer hunting right, we lose hunting as we know it. Those are facts. So I think it's a step too far to allow baiting for Georgia. So what's next? Texas, again, my home state. It's legal not only to bait deer, but to trap deer off your property and put them in breeding pens, to introduce new semen. You can buy semen in a straw and in vitro your deer and release them back into the wild. Basically, you have ownership of deer in Texas. That's fundamentally against the premise of the North American model of wildlife management that has got us to this point here today. You'll hear a little bit about diseases from one of our next speakers who's widely regarded as a nationwide expert on the subject, so I'll forego that at the moment. But I do want to talk about a couple of social, biological, and other misconceptions associated with baiting. Survey after survey, whether it be in Georgia or across the nation, clearly shows that a vast majority of the non-hunting public strongly opposes hunters hunting over bait. State of Georgia, we're about 5% hunters, about 5% of Georgians. We don't need to alienate further the 80% who can take that privilege away from us. I strongly disagree with the results of the GON survey. Not that what their numbers they calculated correctly, but as you all know, you do all kinds of polls all the time. You know, it can be misconstrued very easily and be very, very biased. There's only been one independent third-party survey done of hunter attitudes, non-hunter attitudes in the state of Georgia. That did not reveal the same numbers that the GON survey did. This was a 2004 survey. Georgia DNR can give you results. But what that showed is that a slight majority of South Georgia deer hunters did support baiting, a slight majority. Throughout the entire state, a slight majority as a whole did not. So it's right down the middle of the road if you look at all hunters in Georgia. You look at South Georgia, it probably is a majority. But I think we can all agree that often a majority of the populace out there wants something that we have to take a stand and say, I'm sorry, but that's not in the best interest of either the resource in this case or public safety or whatever it may be. And I think it's also disappointing that the agency, and I see this in many, many states, the agency entrusted with the management of our wildlife resources often has very little say in what should be done with the management of their species, in this case deer. And that does seem to be the case in this situation as well. What we have seen, and this is not based on supposition. Again, I work 365 days a year. That's all I've done for 2 decades is work deer issues. What we will see with increased baiting is a 400 to 800% increase in the amount of food on the landscape. We've seen it in state after state, Ohio, Kentucky, many states where there was supplemental feeding. And I want to really make a clear distinction there because the member made a great point. Supplemental feeding is a good tool. Supplemental feeding primarily involves the availability of high-quality protein-based feeds. What we're talking about with baiting, almost 100% of the time, is corn. Corn has about 6 to 8% protein. It is not measurably impacting a deer's health or reproductive system. It is a bait, pure and simple. So baiting and supplemental feeding are quite different. Those that are feeding now, primarily are doing so in trough feeders, as much as they can eat, high protein feed. That makes a difference. What we're talking about here is piles of corn on the ground to attract a deer to the gun. Very, very different things. In state after state, we've seen 4 to 8-fold increases in the amount of food on the landscape. And we think we have problems now with feral hogs. You increase the amount of corn, which hogs are highly attracted to, you're going to have a very, very much increased nuisance issue with wild hogs. Biologically, a couple of things there. Yes. Okay. I got you. I understand. I'll wrap it up. Again, biologically, is there any biological crisis if baiting were introduced? Not at the moment. But I think the risks far outweigh the benefits. We also have seen increasingly, and this would just be exacerbated by a greatly expanded baiting opportunity in this state, predators, which we now have ample and growing populations of coyotes and bears. And good evidence suggests they're keying into these bait sites and increasing the mortality rates, the death rates of deer at those. They're using these just as deer may come to these to feed, so do coyotes, bears, etc., to ambush these animals. Just wrap it up with a few misconceptions. Baiting will increase hunting success. Well, if we're going to reduce car vehicle collisions, I guess we need to kill more deer. The reality is that has not occurred in states where it's been measured. In fact, a good study out of South Carolina that has baiting in the low part of the state but not in the upstate, very similar to what's being proposed here, showed that hunters where bait was legal, or hunting over bait was legal, actually shot fewer deer per unit effort than those in the upstate where baiting was not legal. So it was not an advantage. Baiting will introduce youth. Well, to what? That's my concern. You know, hunters, yes, you may be able to show them a deer over a corn pile, but in today's engaged, my little techno daughters that I have, that's not what's going to engage them, is sitting there staring at a pile of corn, I can assure you. Baiting will retain more hunters. Okay, if that's the case, why is Georgia currently the state in which more non-resident hunters come to hunt deer than any state in the nation? More hunters come to Georgia to deer hunt than any state in the nation, more than Texas, more than Illinois, some of the other well-known states. If it retains hunters, why are more Floridians, the state in which more hunters leave their state to hunt elsewhere, coming to Georgia? Baiting is legal in Florida, yet more hunters are leaving their state. And finally, you know, we might as well just do it because, heck, you know, everybody else is doing it. Well, again, I think that's flawed logic. There are many things that many people, many residents are doing that certainly are not in the best interest of, in this case, wildlife. So at the end of the day, you know, it's our professional opinion, one we're ready to go on record with, that the risks, the downsides far outweigh any potential benefits. And again, hunters are 5% of the population. 80+% of the non-hunting public strongly opposes baiting for deer in Georgia at similar rates to hunting in fenced enclosures. That's what we're talking about here. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. We appreciate your comments. All right, now we have Mr. Keel. If you'd come up, set it on 6. You have about 6 minutes we're going to limit you to. And Mr. Tanner, we're going to give you 2 or 3 minutes when it's your time because we're running way over.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you. I'm a wildlife veterinarian and a wildlife biologist working with the Southeastern Cooperative Wildlife Disease Study at the University of Georgia. Before I go too much into my role, however, I'd like to add my personal background. I was born and raised in South Georgia in Liberty County. I've been deer hunting since I was 10 years old, killed my first deer when I was 11, and I still hunt almost exclusively in South Georgia on our personal family property in Evans County. The Southeastern Cooperative Wildlife Disease Study was established in 1957 for the sole purpose of promoting wildlife health. One thing that we have learned in that time, we've learned it the hard way, is that the only really good way that you can deal with wildlife disease issues is to prevent them. Once they become established in wildlife populations, there's generally nothing we can do about them. When I hear the argument that we've never had a problem and we've been feeding deer, well, just be glad that you haven't. Bovine tuberculosis is a problem in Michigan in association with feeding deer. They have not been able to do anything about TB in the deer in Michigan, even though they have gone through great expense to try and limit the disease in those herds. And it is very tightly correlated with feeding deer in that state. Where they do not feed deer, they don't see the disease occurring in deer. Chronic wasting disease is another example. That one is not always just associated with feeding, but a good example of a wildlife disease that once it's established in a population, there's nothing you can do about it. We're concerned about wildlife disease in relation to feeding for a couple of reasons. One is that a lot of the bait piles that we have looked at have had mold toxins associated with them. These are aflatoxins that certainly can impact the health of the deer and even more significantly other wildlife such as turkeys, which are more sensitive to it. It also increases the density of deer at a focal site such that infectious agents are more readily passed from deer to deer. So you get nose-to-nose contact, just like in grade school with your kids. You see more ready transmission of agents when deer are close together. Also, you may encounter a situation where the environment is heavily seeded with a particular infectious agent because there are so many deer at that one spot. I've given the example of bovine tuberculosis in Michigan. Another good example is brucellosis in the greater Yellowstone area. In that case, elk are sustained at a very high level because they're fed on winter feeding grounds, and during that time brucellosis is transmitted efficiently from elk to elk, and that's the reason it's maintained in that population. Both of these diseases have come at great expense to livestock. In Michigan, I know Bovine tuberculosis has cost the cattle industry over $150 million since it was identified in 1995. 2 people have also contracted the disease. So there are certainly significant concerns. I have heard a lot of arguments for why we should have baiting. One is that, well, we're already feeding deer. I would say that we're not proponents of feeding deer or baiting in regard to wildlife health. However, feeding is somewhat limited, and in states where they have passed baiting legislation, there has been a 4- to 8-fold increase in the amount of bait put in the environment. So we see that as a 4- to 8-fold increase in the risk associated with that behavior, and we would certainly like to avoid that. I've also heard the argument, well, I've been feeding, as I said before, for years, and I haven't had a problem. Well, there are other things that people do that may not have resulted in a problem. You may have driven your whole life without wearing a seatbelt, but that doesn't remove the fact that there is an increased risk associated with that behavior, and we certainly strongly argue that there's an increased risk associated with this. I think I'll just close there, and for the sake of time.
Thank you so much.
you.
We appreciate you coming and offering those words, and I'm sure that Representative.
Are we allowed to ask questions to the
Well,
presenters, or
since we pushed the time, but since he didn't finish all of his time, Representative Dobbs, I think it'd be appropriate to ask a question if you'd like to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
He has just a short period of time. You have a minute or so left. That's about it.
My question is the disease risks and the other problems that were presented to us by the other gentleman that testified. By removing the 200 feet restriction and the 10-day restriction, as I understand this bill, or the 200 yards, is this going to encourage more baiting by hunters, and that is the reason why y'all are opposed to this bill?
Well, I think the statistics indicate that passing a bill like this, allowing people to shoot over bait, will actually increase in the amount of bait put out there. I know Brian has data he's acquired that where states that have passed such laws, it's resulted in a 4- to 8-fold increase in the amount of bait put out there, 400 to 800% increase. And we see that, again, as just that much additional risk associated with it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Keel. Mr. Scott Tanner, you got a couple of minutes. Thank you, sir. Tell us who you are.
Mr. Chairman, thanks for the indulgence. I know we're running close on time. Scott Tanner, Heritage and Wildlife Conservation Council. I will try to make about 2 points very quickly. The first one is, I hope everybody can hear me okay. Looks like it's working. Some states do this already. Many do not. So we're not the first people to invent the concept of baiting up deer. So we can look at other states and see what their experience has been. I actually have in my possession 3 letters right now. I distribute them to you, but I don't think you really have time to read them, but I'll be happy to give them to you. 2 of them actually come from Florida. One is from the former Fish and Game Commission chair. That's their DNR. He basically says we have all sorts of problems with deer baiting down here. I wish we could get rid of it. It influences our management decisions. Our game and fish people can't do their jobs. It's a problem, and because of that, I hunt deer in Georgia. I also have a letter from a gentleman named Rodney Barreto. He is the current chairman of the Fish and Game Commission. He's actually been on that board for 7 years. Wrote a similar letter. I also have a letter from Michigan's Game and Fish Commission. Same thing. They have deer baiting up there. That on their letterhead it says, "Learn from our mistakes. Don't do this." It's a big problem. From my experience, from what I've heard from my research, essentially once you get deer baiting, even though we might empower the DNR to be able to take that away, economics come in, and the people who are deer baiting, who simply have lost the ability to hunt deer anymore. All they know how to do is shoot deer over bait. Won't tolerate it. The people who sell corn, they don't want it. They say you're getting into our back pocket. Once you get it, you can't get rid of it. So that's been the experience in other states. Also, I looked at what's going on in the other states. Where are they? Only 3 states in our nation statutorily permit deer baiting. Many of the rest that have it simply have it because it was never against the law, therefore it's not illegal to do it. What's been the recent history of deer baiting around the country? In states that have put prohibitions on it: 1991, New Hampshire; 1997, Wisconsin; 2001, Wyoming; 2002, Illinois; 2003, Connecticut; 2005, Vermont; 2008, Michigan. Some type of restriction or prohibition on deer baiting. I cannot find a single state that has actually added deer baiting. The closest one I found was about 2 years ago in Mississippi, a non-deer baiting state. They did pass a bill. Governor Haley Barbour vetoed the bill. Part of his veto message said deer management decisions are best made in our DNR, basically, to paraphrase. That's the first point I wanted to make. That's the experience from other places. The second one is this, very quickly. In our state's law, it says that the ownership, jurisdiction of, control of all wildlife defined in this title, this is the beginning of Title 27, declared in the state of Georgia in its sovereign capacity to be controlled, regulated, and disposed in accordance with this title. I could go on, but basically that means the wildlife is held in trust by the state for the people of Georgia, all the people. This actually happens to be the very first tenet of the North American wildlife model, has 7 tenets. This is statutorily written into our law that the deer, all the wildlife, in fact, all of God's wild creatures are held in trust by the state. The stewardship of all those wild creatures actually falls under your purview. It is your awesome responsibility, all the members of this committee, to make decisions that affect the well-being and the future of all those wild animals for the people of Georgia, all the people, not just the people in your district, but all the citizens of Georgia, whether they're hunters or non-hunters. So I ask you to consider all of the phone calls, all the faxes, all the emails that you received. They all came from actual, real people, whether they're for or against, whether you're in your district or not. You, the members of the Game and Fish Committee, are tasked with the responsibility. I know I'm out of time. I just also want to say this bill has some serious problems. I believe it is the mechanics of it are fatally flawed. I don't believe it should move forward, and I ask you to consider what I've said. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to allow one question from Representative Bruce.
It seems like all of the people have spoken and not talked. They talked about how we kill the deer. It's not a question of whether we're going to kill them or not. It's how we're going to kill them. So that's the part that's confusing for me. You know, maybe you could help me with that, because we're saying kill the deer, we're just saying don't kill them this way, but they still just as dead. That's what I'm trying to understand what the point is.
Biologically, a dead deer is a dead deer, whether you shoot it over a pile of corn or not, you hit it with a car. I think what the point, at least those of us who are opposed to the bill, are saying, there is some people that want to shoot deer over corn this way. I mean, they want to shoot deer over bait. Okay, what's the big deal? Maybe it has some benefits. What we're trying to present is that there's a mountain of evidence over here on the other side weighing you down, saying this isn't a good idea. It's not that, dead deer is still a dead deer, but the disease, the predators, all these risks that we've mentioned that I don't want to repeat in the interest of time, but it's that weight of evidence. If you're on the scale, they're saying that this isn't a good way to do it. It's not a good way to manage the resource. Managing the resource is about more than just shooting the deer. Be my answer.
Thank you, Mr. Tanner. We appreciate your words, and I'm glad for you to testify before the committee. We have now Mr. Reggie Dickey. And Representative Shaw, I'll tell you that as soon as Mr. Dickey is finished, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes, strictly a couple of minutes, to wrap up, and we're going to bring this issue to a question. Reggie Dickey, tell us who you are again.
All right.
And who you represent. Thanks for being
Chairman,
here.
I'm Reggie Dickey, president of the Georgia Hunting and Fishing Federation, and I represent hunters all across the state. And I've heard a lot of interesting comments on this bill and on this issue over the past few years, and a lot of times I begin to wonder if I'm sitting in Atlanta or if I'm in Wisconsin or Maryland or Virginia. But this bill we got right here deals strictly with the state of Georgia. We are not, in this bill, we are not adding anything that is not already in existence as far as feeding deer. It is now legal in Georgia to put bait out, just stay 200 yards and 1 inch away from it. We have not had any disease outbreaks in this state. We have a healthy deer herd. We have, even since baiting it's been going on, I know, since for 40 years, and in the last 20 it's got extremely heavy, and in the last 10 I would say that it would be almost impossible to put more corn on the ground in South Georgia than being put out now. We haven't harmed the turkeys. We have a tremendous flock of turkeys across South Georgia. They have benefited greatly from it. If it'll draw hogs to the bait, then this bill lets you shoot the hogs over the bait too. A lot of this stuff that I've heard doesn't even pertain to this bill. Feeding will not cause the disease. It will not bring in CWD. If that disease comes in here, it'll spread like wildfire anyway, because every deer that's got it, every deer it breeds, and every fawn it has will have this disease. Feeding won't cause it. You have deer feeding in fields and food plots now, one right behind the other. They are a touching animal. They stay together. They family oriented. So you're gonna have that problem anyway. The only thing we want to do is remove the 200 yards and out of sight. Now you tell me the difference in me sitting on a food plot. Just visualize this in your mind. I'm in a tower stand. This is a food plot and 1,000 acres of pine trees. I got a stand here. I planted that there. It didn't come natural. I planted it. I fertilized it and I sweetened it up. For the simple reason, and I'm sitting here because that's a bait to draw a deer to my gun. Well, there's a fellow over here with a smaller parcel of land, or he's leasing land from a timber company that won't allow him to clear a place to plant a food plot, or he doesn't have the equipment or the money to plant a food plot. But yet, people don't want him to sit over this stand just like they do the food plot and hunt the deer. Now where's the difference? We penalizing this guy here for the same thing this man's doing here. When you come to fair chase and ethics, my view on that is it's ethical and it's fair chase if it's legal by the code. Anything else is not ethical and it's not fair chase. The only way I told some of you in committee the other day, if you're gonna hunt fair chase, where's fair? Tell me what fair chase is. If I have a rifle that I'm sitting in a stand and I can hit a deer, a pie plate, 6-inch pie plate at 300 yards consistently, and I'm sitting on a green field or a food plot, a deer walks out in that field and I shoot him. He didn't even know I was in the world. Where's the fair chase? If I'm a bow hunter and I'm sitting in a tree and a deer walks by, most times a bow hunter make a little noise to make him stop so he can shoot him. Where's the fair chase? If you want to be fair chase and you're going to go watch actually fair chase, holler run, then shoot it. Other than that, let's get rid of fair chase and ethics. If this violates your ethics, hunting over feed, don't do it. That's my advice to anybody on anything. Whatever you're going to do, if it violates your ethics, think about it and don't do it. But don't penalize the small man just because he can't afford a feed plot, and don't compare us with Virginia and North Carolina or Michigan and Wisconsin, because we don't have the same kind of weather. Our deer's not hemmed up in deer herds. Our deer herds stay dispersed. And you will not find 50 head of deer around a feeder. I don't care what these people try to lead you to believe, nor are you going to see many come stick their head down the corn on the ground. Most of the time, the majority of the corn that hits that ground is ate by turkeys, squirrels, crows, and the deer gets very little of it. So it's not going to stay there long enough to get have foxing in it. If you test the corn in the field, and it's been done, go around and test the corn that's left in a green field that's got more foxing in it than that in the field. Thank you. Any questions?
Question he's got a minute. Representative Dobbs.
Real quick question. I understand both sides of this argument, and I'm torn between both sides, but my question is if we take away the 200 yard restriction, do you think there are going to be more deer killed as a result of us changing the law? And if so, can our deer population withstand that?
No, ma'am. The reason I say that is because like I said, this hunting over bait, this feed's been going on for many years. In the last few years, it's got very heavy. There's no documented evidence and from DNR that hunting over bait or hunting over feed will increase or decrease the deer herd. Our deer herd has dropped from where it's at now for a number of reasons, and it's not feed. And there's no scientific evidence, no documentation that'll affect it. And no, there won't be any more deer killed because most of the people that are hunting over feed are selective hunting. They're not out there to slaughter. Hunters are not out to slaughter the game. We're out to protect it. We've got a bag limit, and we abide by it. But no, it will not cause any more deer to get killed, and it won't cause any great boom in reproduction.
Thank you. In the spirit of fairness, we've done that all the way through these hearings. Is there one more brief question for Mr. Dickey from the committee? Representative Williams.
Question I want to ask you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I know we've heard this. I don't know if we can talk it anymore. I know the deer now from the end of his tail to his nose. At some point, I want to call the question. Let's go ahead and do this.
Representative, and I appreciate that because I know you've not killed one because you're not a hunter. And we appreciate about that about you. Thank you, Mr. Dickey. We appreciate you being here and your efforts. Great conversation, great testimony. Representative Shaw, if you'll retrieve that microphone and give us just the facts, and if you'll finish up, we're going to call the question on this deal and move forward with it. So we'll ask you to wrap up right quick. Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate all your time. And, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate you for giving this a very, very fair hearing. I think you've done a good job. Basically, you know, we could have filled up, and we could have filled up the biggest committee room in this place if we wanted to. Most of the folks that are passionate like me come from, you know, a pretty good distance. So a lot of them have traveled here over the last week and have presented their case, and I don't think it would be fair to anybody here for them to repeat themselves again. They've already spoken, and everybody's heard. You know, basically the facts on this bill are is right now you can plant a feed plot or you can hunt over a feed, which is feed, and you can harvest an animal. What is the difference between hunting over a feeder and hunting over a feed plot? Feed is feed. The feed is there. Supplemental feeding is legal. If we were having problems with disease, we would have already had it. People have been feeding for years. As a matter of fact, nowadays the feed that's being used on supplemental feeding techniques is some of the most, is very high protein, and it's very healthy, and it allows deer, and that's why we've got bigger and better deer than we've ever had in Georgia. And we're starting to get like Texas and some of these other places that a lot of people I know, and myself included, travel to harvest trophy animals. Bottom line is feeding does not cause disease in any way, shape, or form. Sportsmen, this bill will allow sportsmen to do what they want and allow private property owners to decide whether or not into the southern zone if this technique can be allowed. Has to be approved by the property owner, but sportsmen are the biggest conservationists out there. It costs a lot of money, folks. You're not going to see any big piles of corn like that when corn's costing you $10 a bag to buy. I mean, that's just not going to happen, folks. That I can promise you. But sportsmen spend a lot of money, and they are the biggest conservationists. You don't spend that kind of money and take that amount of time without doing it the right way. I mean, you're doing it for the right reasons. As far as the southern zone having to have the landowner permission, I'll go a step further. If you are leasing some land, say from a timber company, whether you're coming from North Georgia or anywhere, you could have a club rule. I mean, you could say, hey, our club will not allow hunting over bait. That could be a club rule. I mean, for those that don't want to, just you can easily have a group that you hunt with that you don't do it. I mean, you can do what you want. That's what this is about. It's just a simple change in the law. Supplemental feeding is legal, and I'm going to close with this. Supplemental feeding is currently legal. All this does is allow you to hunt in the proximity of the feed. That's all it is. It's that simple, and I'd appreciate it. I appreciate your time, and I'd appreciate your favorable consideration to this House Bill 277. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good job, Representative Shaw. Your daddy would be proud. I want to recognize Representative Williams for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that this committee do pass on this bill. LC 5871S. 72S, I'm sorry, 72S.
72S. That's our motion that's on the floor before us. Representative Knight, did you say you wanted to have a motion?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, at appropriate time, I want to make a motion that we amend this bill. I've stated my reasons, and I've heard from both two of the authors that said that in no way does this bill put me or other adjacent landowners in jeopardy, especially under federal guidelines, and I seriously even have doubts under state guidelines, but under federal guidelines as I pursue other game. I'd like to make a motion that we amend House Bill 277 before us by on line 20, after the words "will be hunting," insert the words "provided, however, that no such feed or bait be within 300 yards placed of any property boundary."
Mr. Chairman, point of order, please, sir.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman?
I think we got to get a second on
Yes, sir.
the
I have a
rev
motion on the floor.
before we can do
Excuse me.
anything like
Yes, sir.
this.
Excuse me. There was, and I apologize. There was a motion to call the question on the bill made by Representative Williams. Did I hear a second on that motion?
Heck, I'll second it if it'll hurry it up.
There's a second. All right, and then we have another amendment that or amendment to the bill. Now, does everyone have the language of the amendment? If they do I hear a second on that amendment? Second. Hear a second on the amendment. Now, what we'll do now, we will consider and we'll take a vote on the Knight amendment. Is everyone understand what we're voting on?
You want me to do it? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On line 20 of the bill, after the words "will be hunting," insert the words "provided, however, that no such feed or bait shall be within 300 yards or shall be placed within 300 yards of any property boundary."
Is everyone clear on the Knight amendment? All those in favor of the Knight amendment as presented, raise your right hand at this time. One, two, it's four. What do you, Jim? Okay. All those opposed to the Knight amendment? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The amendment fails. Now we're back to the question of LC 255872S.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Chairman McCall.
300 yards or that's 1,000 feet.
It is.
Long-range shooters that prop up on tables don't shoot but 1,000. They shoot 1,000 yards, 1,000 feet. That's 3 football fields. That's a long ways from a property line.
Well, thank you, sir. We're going to take up the motion. We've debated this thing for about 5 or 6, 7 hours at this point in time. I think everyone's made their points. So we're going to call the question and put it before the committee. This time, everybody in favor of 5872S, let it be known by raising your right hand. We have 7 votes for. All opposed, raise your right hand. I have 4 votes recorded against. House Bill, the substitute to House Bill HB 277, which is LC 285872S, passes out of this committee with a do pass recommendation to the full body.
Mr. Chairman, I want to make sure
and we will make it available to anyone who would like to. It is appropriate to file a minority report to go with our recommendation from this bill. So we ask anybody to that would like to do so. It's their option. This meeting's adjourned. Thank you so much. Minority.